Picture this. You're 8 months pregnant, the only black woman in a glass-walled boardroom 30 stories above the city, and your millionaire husband just turned you into a punchline. He's shouting about pregnancy brain and nursery colors while hurling your strategic reports across the mahogany table like trash. Papers explode into the air. Cameras catch your tears on the live stream. Everyone laughs. The shareholders, the board members, even his blonde mistress smirking by the window. What they don't know, what he doesn't know, is that through a web of anonymous shell companies and family offices, you quietly own 80% of every company his name is stamped on. Every single one. Before we dive into this powerful story, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment below where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing where my stories are reaching. This is the story of Sonia Hale, the brilliant black risk analyst who built a white man's empire from the ground up, then bought it out from under him while he degraded her in front of his own investors. She didn't just survive the humiliation, she weaponized it. And at this shareholders meeting, in front of cameras, lawyers, and the man who thought he owned her, she's about to stop being the crying wife in the corner and introduce herself properly as his boss. Stay with me, because Sonia is about to deliver more than just a baby today. She's about to deliver justice, and it's going to be brutal, brilliant, and absolutely legal. The binder hit the mahogany table so hard that papers erupted into the air like startled birds. Sonia Hale flinched, 8 months pregnant, and wedged into a white maternity suit, watching sheets of her own strategic analysis float down around the glass-walled boardroom like defeated surrender flags. The room fell silent except for the air conditioning's sterile hum, too cold, always too cold in this building, as if warmth might make the men uncomfortable. "Maybe," Jonathan Hale said from his position at the head of the table, his voice thick with performance and contempt, "if you spent less time waddling around this office and more time resting that baby brain, you'd actually understand and what we're discussing here." He jabbed a finger toward her, his face flushed with the kind of rage he only showed when cameras were rolling and he had an audience to impress. "Why don't you leave the numbers to people who actually understand finance, babe, and focus on things you're qualified for, like nursery colors and baby shower themes?" Laughter rippled through the room like a wave of casual cruelty. Marcus Chen, the venture capitalist who'd never sourced a deal without her guidance, smirked openly. Diane Thompson, the only other woman on the board, studied her phone screen as if the humiliation wasn't happening. Martha Hale, Jonathan's mother, examined her diamond-studded watch with the detached interest of someone watching a tiresome play she'd seen before. Only Dev Patel, the CFO, looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between the scattered papers and Sonia's face with something that might have been shame. Sonia's face burned. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, once, twice, as if to say, "Fight back, Mama. Don't let him do this. Don't cry. Don't you dare cry it." That's exactly what he wants. She'd only asked a simple question. A polite correction, really, about the third-quarter profit projections Jonathan was presenting to shareholders. Numbers that didn't match the internal reports she'd reviewed last week. Numbers that suggested someone was siphoning money through fake consulting contracts. Numbers that could destroy thousands of employees' pensions if left unchecked. But Jonathan continued as if she hadn't spoken, clicking his remote to advance the slide. The projection screen behind him lit up with a chart Sonia had built during her second trimester. When the nausea was so brutal, she'd kept a trash can beside her desk. "As you can see," he said, gesturing broadly at data she'd spent months compiling. My 5-year expansion strategy projects 42% growth across all verticals. My strategy. His presentation. Sonia's breath caught in her throat. She'd drafted that strategy during sleepless nights, pulling from a decade of risk analysis and fintech exits that had made her wealthy long before Jonathan's surname ever touched her bank account. She'd negotiated preliminary terms with 2 of the 3 acquisition targets while Jonathan was posting gym selfies and flirting with Ashley, his executive assistant, who now stood near the windows in a blazer so red it looked like a victory flag. But here, in this room, in front of investors and cameras, Jonathan presented her work as if it had materialized, fully formed, from his own genius. Sonia lowered herself carefully back into her chair, movements slow and deliberate around her swollen belly. The baby kicked again, harder this time, a small fist of fury against her ribs. She did what she always did when humiliated in this boardroom. She counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 42 acoustic ceiling tiles. She'd memorized every one during the 11 meetings where Jonathan had spoken over her, dismissed her, or worse, pretended she wasn't there at all. 5, 6, 7, 8. Of course, Marcus added, his voice oily with manufactured enthusiasm. Jonathan's vision for Hale Global has been nothing short of transformative. The board is exceptionally fortunate to have such decisive leadership. 9, 10, 11, 12. Jonathan beamed, soaking in praise for strategies he hadn't conceived. For relationships Sonia had cultivated over years in investment banking before she'd made the catastrophic mistake of falling in love with a man who needed her brilliance but resented her for having it. 13, 14, 15, 16. In the back corner, partially obscured by the projection glow, sat Aunt Ijoma, listed in the meeting notes as a consultant from an external advisory firm. Their eyes met briefly. Ijoma's expression remained professionally neutral, but Sonia caught the slight nod. The signal, the one they'd agreed on over jollof rice and red wine 3 months ago, when Sonia had finally broken down and admitted she couldn't survive another year of this. When the time comes, Ijoma had said, spreading cap tables and corporate bylaws across her dining table like battle plans, you'll know, and you'll be ready. 17, 18, 19, 20. The time was coming. Sonia could feel it approaching like pressure before a storm, like contractions before labor, like the moment before a detonation when everything goes quiet and bright. Jonathan advanced another slide, a glossy rendering of international offices Sonia had scouted, markets she'd analyzed, expansion she'd modeled down to the last risk-adjusted dollar. Our aggressive move into emerging markets, he announced, represents my commitment to positioning Hale Global as a true industry titan. Your commitment, her analysis, his empire, her money. Sonia's phone buzzed silently against her thigh. She glanced down at the screen beneath the table's edge. An email from Ijoma. Subject line, all entities at 80%. Time to decide. Sonia looked up at the man shouting at her, at the people laughing with him, at the cameras recording her humiliation for investor broadcasts and social media clips. She pressed both palms flat against her belly, feeling her daughter move beneath her hands. And for the first time in 3 years, she let herself think it clearly, completely, without fear. This is my empire. He just doesn't know it yet. Let him shout. Let him perform. Let him bask in applause for work he didn't do. Because when I stand up, and I will stand up soon, it won't be as his wife. It will be as his owner. "We'll break for 15 minutes, Jonathan announced, snapping his laptop closed with theatrical finality. Sonia remained seated, counting tiles, counting heartbeats, counting the hours until the man who'd tried to erase her would finally learn what it cost to underestimate a black woman who knew how to read a balance sheet and how to own one. But understanding how Sonia ended up in this glass tower, 8 months pregnant, and holding 80% of an empire in her name, requires going back 3 years, back to when she was just a brilliant young risk analyst with a 9-figure exit check and a dangerous habit of falling for men who needed saving. But understanding how Sonia ended up in this glass tower, 8 months pregnant, and holding 80% of an empire in her name, requires going back 3 years, back to when she was just a brilliant young risk analyst with a 9-figure exit check and a dangerous habit of falling for men who needed saving. 3 years earlier, Sonia had been a different woman. Not softer, never that, but unburdened. She'd worked 18-hour days at a scrappy fintech startup called Apex Solutions, the kind of place where the coffee was terrible, the air conditioning barely worked, and the risk models were revolutionary. While her colleagues built algorithms, Sonia built something more valuable. She saw patterns in chaos. She placed mathematically grounded bets on markets everyone else called unstable. And she was right, more often than anyone had a right to be. When the acquisition offer came, $340 million from a European banking conglomerate, Sonia's equity stake translated to $28 million. After taxes, she walked away with $19 million in her name, her account, her future. She was 29 years old. She met Jonathan Hale 3 weeks later at a venture capital mixer in Soho, the kind of event where everyone clutched champagne flutes and pretended their startups weren't hemorrhaging cash. He'd approached her with the easy confidence of a man who'd never been told no, his hand extended, his smile practiced, but somehow still warm. "Jonathan Hale," he'd said, "I heard you just walked away from the Apex deal with enough money to retire. So why are you here drinking bad champagne with desperate founders?" Sonia had laughed despite herself. "Because retiring at 29 sounds boring, and the champagne isn't that bad." He was handsome in an approachable way, good jawline, expensive haircut, clothes that whispered old money without shouting it. What Sonia didn't know then, what she'd learn only later, was that the Hale surname carried more weight than the Hale bank account. Jonathan's family had prestige and connections, but the actual liquid capital had evaporated 2 generations back through bad investments and expensive divorces. What he had was ambition. What Sonia had was money and a mind that could turn failing companies into gold. They were married within a year. The early days of Hale Global Holdings felt like partnership. Real partnership. They'd sit in Jonathan's cramped studio apartment. He refused to let her pay for something bigger, pride already asserting itself, surrounded by printed financial statements, market analyses, and cold pizza. Sonia would identify targets. Struggling logistics companies with good bones, underperforming tech firms with salvageable IP, distressed real estate in emerging markets. Jonathan would make the calls, schmooze the sellers, close the deals with charm Sonia didn't have and didn't want. "You're the brains," he'd say, kissing the top of her head as she ran another cash flow projection at 2 a.m. "I'm just the pretty face." Their first acquisition, a failing freight logistics company in Cleveland, they bought for $3.2 million of Sonia's money. She restructured the routes, renegotiated the union contracts, implemented software that cut fuel costs by 18%. 16 months later, they flipped it for $8.7 million. They celebrated in that tiny apartment with champagne that was actually good this time, Jonathan lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "We're going to build an empire, Sonia. You and me." She'd believed him. The second deal was bigger. The third, bigger still. Sonia's capital and strategy, Jonathan's network and charisma. Hale Global Holdings grew from a two-person operation to a portfolio of 6 companies, then 12, then 20. But somewhere between companies 8 and 15, Jonathan started suggesting she take a step back from the public side. "Investors respond better to one clear voice," he'd said over breakfast, his tone casual, reasonable. "It's not about you, babe. It's just optics. You know how these old money guys are. They want to see themselves reflected back. I'll handle the meetings. You keep doing what you do best, making us rich." Sonia had hesitated, but he'd wrapped his arms around her, pressed his forehead to hers, whispered that he couldn't do any of this without her, that she was the genius behind everything. So she'd agreed. The erasure happened slowly, then all at once. First, she stopped being introduced at investor meetings. Jonathan would gesture vaguely toward her and say, "My incredible wife," without mentioning her name or her role. Then her name disappeared from email threads, replaced with Jonathan's alone. Then she stopped being invited to panels, strategy sessions, even internal reviews of deals she'd personally structured. "We can't confuse the market with too many voices," Jonathan said when she confronted him after being excluded from a board presentation. "People need to know who's in charge. It's just cleaner this way." When she got pregnant, the erasure turned vicious. At a tech conference panel, a moderator asked Jonathan about his visionary leadership. He'd leaned into the microphone, grinned, and said, "Well, my wife keeps me grounded. She'll be running the nursery while I keep running the numbers." The mostly white, mostly male audience had roared with laughter. Sonia, 6 months pregnant and sitting in the third row, had felt something inside her harden into stone. The worst moment came during a board meeting for one of their real estate subsidiaries. Sonia had flagged a zoning issue that could tank a development deal, presenting her analysis clearly, calmly, professionally. A board member, gray-haired, red-faced, old Connecticut money, had waved his hand dismissively. "Well, aren't you just our lucky charm?" he'd said, his tone dripping with condescension, bringing that intuition to the table. Jonathan had laughed, actually laughed, not defended her, not corrected the record. Just smiled and moved on to the next agenda item as if Sonia's mathematical analysis was equivalent to a rabbit's foot or a horseshoe. She'd made it through the rest of the meeting on autopilot, then locked herself in a bathroom stall and sobbed until her ribs ached. That night, sitting on the cold tile floor of a corporate bathroom at 7 months pregnant, Sonia called Aunt Ijoma. "I think I made a mistake," she whispered into the phone. "I think I'm trapped." "Come over," Ijoma said simply. "Now." Aunt Ijoma's kitchen table had seen Sonia through breakups, career pivots, and her mother's funeral. But that night, it became a war room. Ijoma set down jollof rice, fried plantains, and a bottle of red wine. "Just one glass won't hurt the baby." And let Sonia talk. The whole ugly story spilled out. The erasure, the humiliation, the stolen credit, the board member's lucky charm comment, Jonathan's laughter. When Sonia finally went quiet, Ijoma stood without a word and returned with a leather portfolio. Inside, Hale Global's corporate bylaws, Sonia's original investment contracts, and 3 legal pads covered in her godmother's precise handwriting. "How much liquid capital do you still have in your name?" Ijoma asked. Sonia blinked. "I don't know. Maybe 8 million. The rest is tied up in the companies." "Good. That's enough to start." Ijoma uncapped a pen. "Here's what we're going to do. You're going to create a web of holding companies, LLCs, family offices, trusts, clean, legal, impossible to trace back to you without forensic accounting. Then those entities are going to quietly buy distressed debt, preferred shares, and equity stakes in Hale Global's subsidiaries every time Jonathan needs a capital injection." Sonia stared at her godmother. "You want me to buy my own companies?" "No, baby." Ijoma's smile was sharp as a blade. "I want you to buy his companies. Every time he goes looking for investors, you'll be there. Anonymous, professional, exactly what he needs. And he'll never know the money's coming from the woman he's trying to erase." They worked until 3 a.m., sketching structures, identifying targets, calculating how much voting control Sonia would need to trigger certain bylaws. When the plan was complete, Ijoma made one phone call. "Tiana, it's Ijoma. I need your forensic accounting brain. Tomorrow. Yes, it's urgent. Trust me. You're going to love this." Sonia drove home as dawn broke over the city, her hands steady on the wheel, her daughter kicking gently against her seatbelt. Something had shifted inside her. The crying was done. The begging for respect was over. The next time Jonathan bragged about fresh capital from anonymous investors, he'd be bragging about his wife, and he wouldn't even know it. The next time Jonathan bragged about fresh capital from anonymous investors, he'd be bragging about his wife, and he wouldn't even know it. Over the next 8 months, Sonia became a ghost in her own empire. But ghosts, she learned, could move through walls. 20%. The first acquisition came through a Delaware LLC called Apex Holdings, a name carefully chosen to sound generic, institutional, forgettable. When Hale Global's logistics subsidiary needed $4.2 million to avoid defaulting on a warehouse lease, Apex Holdings appeared with clean capital and reasonable terms. Jonathan celebrated with champagne at a rooftop bar, telling investors about his expanded network of family offices. Sonia had signed the documents that morning in Aunt Ijoma's law office, her hand steady, her signature belonging to a shell company that belonged to a trust that belonged to her. 40%. By month 4, Sonia's web of entities had quietly purchased distressed debt from 3 different Hale Global companies, preferred shares in 2 others, and a controlling stake in a struggling tech subsidiary Jonathan had nearly bankrupted through neglect. Each transaction was clean, legal, and invisible. Tiana's forensic accounting made sure of it. Every structure designed to withstand SEC scrutiny while keeping Sonia's name buried under layers of corporate anonymity. Jonathan threw a party to celebrate the institutional confidence in his leadership. Sonia attended in a maternity dress, smiled for photos, and said nothing. 60%. 80%. By the time Sonia entered her 3rd trimester, she didn't just have significant control. She had absolute control. Every major decision, every board vote, every strategic pivot lived or died by her consent, even if Jonathan would never know it. But while Sonia built her empire in shadows, Jonathan's disrespect metastasized in public. At the annual Hale Global Gala, black tie, open bar, New York's elite, stuffed into the Metropolitan Club, Jonathan gave a speech thanking the incredible people who make this all possible. He gestured toward the crowd, named 3 male executives, then smiled at Sonia sitting at the head table, one hand resting on her swollen belly. And, of course, My beautiful wife, who keeps me sane during the chaos. Not brilliant, not strategic, not the architect of his success. Just beautiful. Just sane-keeping. Ashley, the executive assistant whose job description had apparently expanded to include standing too close to Jonathan at public events, hovered near the bar in a dress so red and so tight it looked like a declaration of war. When Sonia's eyes met hers, Ashley smiled and raised her champagne glass in a mock toast. Later that same night, during the networking hour, Jonathan stood in a circle of investors and laughed too loud at someone's joke about diversity hires. "Hey, we check all the boxes now," he said, gesturing broadly toward Sonia and a young black analyst named Kendra who stood near the appetizer table. "Best decision I ever made. Looks great in the annual report." The men laughed. Kendra's face went carefully blank. Sonia felt something inside her chest crack clean through. The private investigator's report arrived in a manila envelope 3 weeks later. Sonia had hired him after overhearing 2 junior associates whispering near the coffee station about late nights and the executive suite. She'd told herself she just needed to know the scope of the problem for legal protection. But when she opened the folder at Ijoma's kitchen table, the scope was worse than she'd imagined. Hotel receipts, charges to the company card, the Peninsula, the Mark, boutique hotels in Tribeca, where CEOs didn't take their wives, security footage, timestamps, Jonathan and Ashley entering his office at 11 p.m., leaving at 2 a.m., her hair different, his tie gone. Text messages to junior employees, women of color mostly, young and ambitious, promising mentorship, career development, special projects that always seemed to require late dinners and weekend meetings. "He's not just cheating," Sonia said quietly, her hands shaking. "He's hunting." Ijoma's jaw tightened. "Then we hunt back." Tiana's forensic work uncovered something even more dangerous. Jonathan wasn't just a predator. He was a thief. Sham consulting invoices to a company that didn't exist. Offshore accounts in the Caymans funneling money into a side venture. Some kind of cryptocurrency play with a college buddy, funded entirely with Hale Global Capital. Fake vendor payments. Inflated expense reports. "If regulators catch this," Tiana said, spreading spreadsheets across Sonia's dining table, "it's not just Jonathan going down. It's the whole company. Employees lose their pensions. Shareholders lose their investments. This is criminal." Sonia stared at the numbers, feeling her daughter kick against her ribs like a warning. "Then we don't let regulators catch it," she said. "We catch it first." Kendra Chen met Sonia at a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, far from midtown offices where someone might recognize them. The young analyst arrived 20 minutes early, laptop bag clutched against her chest like armor. I wasn't sure you'd actually want to meet," Kendra said as Sonia lowered herself carefully into the booth. "I want to hear what you have to say." Kendra's story came out in careful, precise detail. The kind of detail that told Sonia this woman had been documenting everything. Texts from Jonathan about grabbing drinks to discuss your career trajectory. Comments in meetings about her bringing flavor to the room, pressure to travel with him to conferences. Implications that promotions required loyalty. "I've been keeping records," Kendra said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "Emails, screenshots, recordings from my phone. I didn't know what to do with them. He's the CEO. Who's going to believe me?" Sonia picked up the drive, held it like the weapon it was. "I believe you," she said quietly, "and I'm going to make sure everyone else does too. But I need to know, are you willing to testify? In writing. with legal protection. Kendra's eyes filled with tears. If you protect me, yes. If you promise he can't retaliate, he won't be in a position to retaliate, Sonia interrupted. I promise you that. They shook hands across the table. Two women Jonathan had underestimated, building a case he'd never see coming. Martha Hale was harder to crack. Sonia cornered her at a charity gala in the sculpture garden of a museum where old money gathered to congratulate itself. Martha stood alone near a Rodin, champagne in hand, diamonds at her throat that cost more than most people's houses. We need to talk, Sonia said, placing a slim folder on the stone bench beside them. Martha's expression didn't change. About? About whether you want your granddaughter to inherit a clean legacy or a criminal enterprise. That got her attention. Inside the folder, the PI report. Tiana's forensic findings, projections of regulatory fines, criminal exposure, reputational damage. The Hale name, Martha's obsession, her religion, dragged through federal court and tabloid headlines. Jonathan made mistakes, Martha said finally, her voice tight. Boys do. He'll learn. He's 43 years old, Martha, and these aren't mistakes. They're crimes. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of auction bids and polite laughter. What do you want? Martha asked. Your convertible preferred shares. In any board vote, I need you on my side. And in exchange? The Hale name stays on the door. Jonathan loses his title, but the legacy survives. Martha's fingers tightened around her champagne flute. Sonia could see the war happening behind her eyes. Maternal instinct versus dynastic pride. If I do this, Martha said slowly, he'll never forgive me. He'll never forgive either of us, Sonia replied. But your granddaughter will. Martha stared at the folder for a long moment, then nodded once. Sharp. Final. You have my shares. Jonathan's reformation attempt came 2 weeks later. A surprise baby moon to Turks and Caicos. A suite overlooking water so blue it looked fake. Couple photos posted to Instagram with captions about what really matters. On the flight home, he took Sonia's hand. I've been thinking, he said. Maybe we should create a women's leadership initiative. You could chair it. Get you more involved again. Sonia looked at him, really looked, and saw exactly what this was. Damage control, image management. A bone thrown to the wife who'd been too quiet lately, whose silence must mean she was planning something. He was right to be nervous. That sounds nice, she said, smiling. We can talk about it after the shareholders meeting. The email came the night before the meeting. Sonia standing at the penthouse window. The city spread out below her like a circuit board of lights and power. From Ijoma Okonkwo. Subject, ready? Message, all entities at 80%. Shareholders meeting is the cleanest battlefield. Are you ready? Sonia placed her palm against the glass, feeling her reflection stare back. A black woman, 8 months pregnant, about to burn down everything a white man built on her back. I'm not just ready, she whispered to her reflection, to her daughter, to the empire sleeping beneath her feet. I'm done. I'm not just ready, she whispered to her reflection, to her daughter, to the empire sleeping beneath her feet. I'm done. The 15-minute break ended with the soft chime of a timer and the shuffle of expensive shoes returning to leather chairs. Sonia remained exactly where she'd been. Front row, white maternity suit, hands folded over her belly, breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins like electricity. Jonathan returned to the podium, energized by whatever conversation he'd had with his loyalists in the hall. He shot Sonia a look, half warning, half contempt, and clicked his remote to resume the presentation. Now, as I was saying before the interruption, the projector displayed another slide of growth metrics, all built on Sonia's models, all credited to Jonathan's visionary leadership. Around the room, board members settled in. Marcus Chen scrolled through his phone. Ashley lingered near the windows, arms crossed, red suit blazing like a victory flag she hadn't earned yet. Sonia let Jonathan talk. Let him brag about market penetration strategies she'd developed. Let him accept murmured praise from men who should have known better. She counted his sentences the way she'd counted ceiling tiles, each one another nail in the coffin he didn't know he was building. When the laughter from his nursery colors joke finally died, when the room settled into satisfied masculine comfort, Sonia stood, slowly, heavily. 8 months of pregnancy making the movement deliberate, impossible to ignore. The room didn't quiet immediately. Jonathan kept talking, gesturing at his slide. But one by one, heads turned. Conversations faltered. Someone coughed. "Jonathan?" Sonia said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "I'm invoking Article 7, Section 3 of the Hale Global Corporate Bylaws." The room went silent. Jonathan's hand froze on his remote. "I'm sorry, what?" His laugh was nervous, performative. "Babe, can this wait until—" "Article 7, Section 3, Sonia repeated, her voice steady as a heartbeat, states that any shareholder controlling more than 50% of voting shares may address the meeting and call for an immediate vote of confidence in executive leadership. She paused, let the words settle. "I'm exercising that right." Confusion rippled through the boardroom. Marcus Chen sat forward. Dev Patel's eyes went wide. Martha Hale's expression remained carved from ice. But Sonia caught the slight nod, the signal they'd agreed on. Jonathan laughed again, louder this time, desperate. "Sonia, you're being emotional. The pregnancy hormones, as controlling owner of 80% of Hale Global's voting shares," Sonia continued, speaking over him with the calm authority of someone who'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. "I'm calling for an immediate vote on your removal as CEO and my appointment as Executive Chair and Interim Chief Executive Officer." The room exploded. 80%? Someone shouted. Marcus Chen choked on his water, coughing violently. A director dropped his pen. Ashley's smirk vanished like someone had wiped it off her face with a cloth. Jonathan went pale, then red. That's impossible. You can't." "I can," Sonia said quietly. "And I do." She nodded toward the back of the room where Aunt Ijoma stood beside 2 assistants holding thick accordion folders. At Ijoma's signal, they began distributing packets to every person at the table. "Inside those folders," Sonia continued as papers rustled and board members frantically flipped through pages, "you'll find complete capitalization tables showing the beneficial ownership structure of Hale Global Holdings and all subsidiary entities. You'll see that entities including Apex Holdings, Sterling Capital Partners, and Meridian Family Office, among others, all trace back to trusts controlled by me. Those entities collectively hold 80% of voting shares across the Hale Global portfolio." "This is a setup!" Jonathan shouted, storming toward her. "She's lying! She's trying to destroy me because she's—" "Page 12, Dev Patel interrupted, standing from his seat, his voice cutting through Jonathan's rage. "The CFO financial audit confirms these ownership structures. I've verified them personally. Ms. Hale's claim is accurate." Jonathan spun toward Dev, betrayal naked on his face. You're in on this? I'm in on protecting this company from regulatory liability, Dev said coldly. Which brings us to the second section of the packet. Sonia watched board members turn pages, their faces shifting from confusion to shock to disgust. Those are forensic accounting reports prepared by an independent analyst, Sonia explained. They document a pattern of fraudulent consulting invoices, unauthorized fund transfers to offshore accounts, and the siphoning of company capital into personal side ventures. Ventures that, if investigated, would expose Hale Global to criminal charges and regulatory penalties that could bankrupt the company and destroy thousands of employees' retirement accounts. "That's a lie," Jonathan shouted. Those numbers are wrong. They're fabricated." "The final section," Sonia continued, her voice never rising, never breaking, "contains signed affidavits from current and former employees detailing a pattern of sexual harassment, coercion, and abuse of power. Witnesses are willing to testify. Documentation is substantial. And all of it creates liability this board cannot afford to ignore." A director Sonia barely knew, someone from old railroad money, stood abruptly. "If even half of this is true, we're looking at shareholder lawsuits, SEC investigations, criminal exposure. It's all lies." Jonathan grabbed a folder from the table, hurled it across the room. Papers exploded like shrapnel. "She's playing the race card. She's weaponizing her pregnancy. She's an ungrateful—" "Enough!" Martha Hale's voice cut through the chaos like a judge's gavel. She stood slowly, one hand resting on the table for balance, diamonds glinting at her throat and wrists. Every eye in the room turned to her. "My convertible preferred shares," Martha said, her voice carrying the weight of 3 generations of Hale family power, "will support the motion for my son's removal and Mrs. Hale's appointment as executive chair." "Mother," Jonathan's voice cracked. Martha didn't look at him. "The Hale name will survive this. You will not take it down with you." One by one, other directors voiced their support, some out of genuine concern, others sensing which way the wind was blowing, a few out of sheer self-preservation. The formal motion was made. Hands rose. Votes were counted by the corporate secretary, her voice shaking slightly as she tallied numbers that would reshape a company. 15 votes in favor of removal. 3 opposed. Motion passes. Jonathan stood frozen at the podium, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. Then he moved, charging toward Sonia with violence in his eyes. Security intercepted him halfway across the room. 2 men in suits, professional and immovable, caught his arms. "You bitch!" he screamed as they dragged him backward. "You've ruined my life, everything I built." Sonia stepped forward, close enough that the cameras would catch every word. "No, Jonathan," she said quietly, clearly. "I stopped you from ruining mine, our daughters, and the lives of everyone whose pension you gambled with. You didn't build this empire. I did. You just stood in front of it and smiled." The cameras caught it. Every word. The line that would play on financial news networks and social media, that would be quoted in business school case studies about corporate governance and quiet power. Security pulled Jonathan toward the exit. He fought them, screaming incoherent accusations, his expensive suit rumpled, his carefully constructed image shattered beyond repair. The door closed behind him. The boardroom fell silent except for the relentless hum of air conditioning and the clicking of cameras. Sonia turned back to face the directors, prepared to address the transition plan, the immediate next steps, the Pain, sharp, unmistakable. A vice grip around her lower back that stole her breath and buckled her knees. She grabbed the edge of the table. The room tilted. "Sonia?" Tiana was suddenly beside her, hands on her shoulders. "Sonia! What?" Warmth flooded down Sonia's legs. She looked down to see her water breaking onto the pristine boardroom carpet, spreading in a pool that reflected the overhead lights. "Oh my God," someone said. "Call an ambulance," Dev shouted, already pulling out his phone. Tiana wrapped an arm around Sonia's waist as another contraction hit, harder than the first. Sonia gasped, her vision blurring at the edges. "I've got you," Tiana whispered. "I've got you, sis. Just breathe." Through the pain, through the chaos of directors scrambling and cameras still rolling and someone yelling about towels, Sonia felt something almost like laughter bubbling up in her chest. She'd just delivered a company. Now her body demanded she deliver a child. She'd just delivered a company. Now her body demanded she deliver a child. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and city lights streaking past like tracer fire. Sonia lay on the gurney, Tiana gripping her hand, another contraction ripping through her body with the force of something that had been held back too long and would not be denied any longer. "Breathe," the paramedic said, a young black woman with kind eyes and steady hands. "You're doing great. Almost there." Between contractions, Tiana's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She glanced at the screen, then at Sonia. "The live stream," Tiana said quietly. "It's everywhere." Sonia could see the headlines reflected in Tiana's eyes. Breaking. CEO ousted in shock, shareholder coup by pregnant wife. Hale global scandal. CFO confirms fraud investigation. Who is Sonia Hale? Another contraction hit. Sonia gasped, arching against the pain, and then, impossibly, laughed. A hoarse, wild sound that made the paramedic look concerned. "You good?" Tiana asked, squeezing her hand harder. "The story's out of my control," Sonia managed between breaths. "But the outcome isn't. That's," she gasped again, "that's all that matters." The delivery room at Mount Sinai was smaller than the boardroom, but felt infinitely safer. The medical team was mostly black women, nurses who moved with quiet efficiency, a doctor who introduced herself as Dr. Okafor, and whose accent reminded Sonia of Aunt Ijoma's kitchen and jollof rice, and the night this plan was born. "I watched the live stream," one of the nurses admitted quietly as she adjusted Sonia's IV. "During my break, I was rooting for you, sis." Sonia wanted to laugh again, or cry, or both. Instead, another contraction seized her, and Dr. Okafor's voice cut through the pain. "Okay, Sonia, it's time. When the next contraction comes, I need you to push." Tiana held one hand. Aunt Ijoma, who'd arrived breathless and still in her courtroom suit, held the other. "You've got this, baby girl," Ijoma whispered. "You've already done the hardest part." Sonia pushed and pushed, and screamed through pain that felt like her body was being torn apart and rebuilt simultaneously, like every humiliation and every silent moment of endurance was being purged in one overwhelming wave of physical reckoning. And then, a cry, small, furious, alive. "It's a girl," Dr. Okafor announced, lifting a tiny, perfect human onto Sonia's chest. Sonia looked down at her daughter, skin dark and soft, eyes squeezed shut, fists already clenched like she was ready to fight the world, and felt something crack open inside her chest that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with purpose. "Amara," Sonia whispered, pressing her lips to the baby's forehead. "Your name is Amara. It means grace." The baby quieted at the sound of her mother's voice, one tiny hand wrapping around Sonia's finger with surprising strength. Sonia bent close, tears streaming freely now, and made a promise she intended to keep for the rest of her life. "You will never," she whispered, "have to shrink to make a man feel big." 6 weeks later, Sonia stood in the kitchen of a brownstone in Fort Greene, a house she'd bought in her own name, with her own money, in a neighborhood where children played in tree-lined streets and corner cafes served good coffee and better community. No glass towers, no sterile penthouses, no mirrors reflecting a woman she no longer recognized. Amara slept against her chest in a wrap carrier, small and warm and impossibly trusting. Sonia's laptop sat open on the kitchen island, a board meeting playing out on Zoom while she rocked gently side to side. "The Ethics and Oversight Committee is fully staffed," Dev Patel reported from his square on the screen. He'd been promoted to CEO, a decision Sonia made the same week she moved out of Jonathan's penthouse. Dev had earned it. He'd stood up when it mattered. "We're also launching the Leadership Pipeline program for women of color in finance and tech. Applications opened yesterday. We've already received over 300. Sonia smiled, adjusting Amara's weight. "Good. Make sure HR prioritizes candidates from HBCUs. And Dev, thank you for everything." Dev nodded. In another square, Martha Hale sat in her Fifth Avenue apartment, pearls in place, face unreadable. She'd kept her word. The Hale name stayed on the letterhead. Jonathan's portrait had been quietly removed from the executive floor. Ashley was gone, terminated for cause, replaced by a consummate professional named Patricia, who was 53, brilliant, and completely uninterested in corporate drama. The company was healing, slowly, carefully, but healing. The co-parenting meeting took place in a neutral law office in Midtown, all beige walls and uncomfortable chairs designed to encourage efficiency over emotion. Jonathan sat across the conference table, flanked by his attorney. He looked thinner, older, his beard grown out unevenly. His eyes kept darting to Amara sleeping in her carrier beside Sonia's chair. "I'm in therapy," he said, his voice rough. 3 times a week. I'm working on myself, Sonia. I know I made mistakes." "You committed fraud," Sonia interrupted calmly. "You harassed employees. You stole credit for my work and humiliated me publicly for years. Those aren't mistakes, Jonathan. Those are choices." His jaw tightened. "I want another chance. At the marriage. At being a family." Sonia looked at him, really looked, and felt nothing. No anger, no longing, not even pity. Just a clean, clear certainty. "The marriage is over," she said, "permanently. What we're here to negotiate is co-parenting." She slid a document across the table. Her attorney had prepared it meticulously. "Supervised visitation to start," Sonia continued. "Weekly therapy compliance reports. A clause preventing you from using Amara in any public statements or social media without my written consent. Financial support will be structured through the trust to protect her interests. If you violate any term, access will be restricted further." Jonathan stared at the document like it was written in a language he didn't understand. "You're really going to keep my daughter from me?" "I'm protecting our daughter from the man you've proven yourself to be," Sonia corrected. "If you do the work, real work, sustained work, we can revisit terms in a year. But you don't get to demand trust you haven't earned. Not anymore." "Sonia, these are the terms, Jonathan. Sign them or don't. But this meeting is over." She stood, gathered Amara's carrier, and walked out without looking back. Outside, The autumn sun felt warm on Sonia's face. She placed Amara's carrier in the stroller, a practical, expensive model she'd chosen herself, no input needed from anyone, and began walking. Not toward the glass towers of Midtown, not toward the penthouse that had felt like a cage, toward the park, toward home, toward a future she was building one deliberate choice at a time. Amara stirred, her tiny hand escaping the blanket, fingers flexing in the light. Sonia caught that hand gently, marveling at how something so small could anchor her so completely. She thought about the woman who'd sat crying in a white suit while a man screamed at her in front of cameras and shareholders. The woman who'd counted ceiling tiles to survive humiliation. The woman who'd believed love meant erasure. That woman was gone, not erased, transformed. Picture this, Sonia thought, smiling as Amara's fingers wrapped around hers. You're a black woman who owns 80% of the companies a man once used to cage you. He lost his reputation. You found your power. And the only person you're interested in impressing now is the little girl whose hand is wrapped around your finger. Behind her, the glass towers of Manhattan reflected clouds and sky, impersonal and distant. Sonia didn't look back. Ahead, Fort Greene stretched out in brownstones and possibility, a neighborhood where she could be brilliant without permission, powerful without apology, a mother raising a daughter who would never learn to make herself small. There would be more battles, shareholder disputes, custody negotiations, rebuilding a company's culture while navigating an industry that still saw her as an anomaly instead of an inevitability. But Sonia wasn't invisible anymore, and she would never let her daughter be. She walked forward into autumn sunlight, her empire behind her, her future in a stroller, and her name, finally, permanently, undeniably, on everything that mattered.